You know, people always talk about the silence at a funeral, how it's supposed to be this heavy, respectful blanket that covers everything, muting the coughs and the shuffling feet and the crying, especially when it's a cop's funeral, because that's not just a goodbye, it's a ceremony, a rigid, starched collar performance of grief where everything has to be perfect, every fold in the flag, every salute, every polished button. But let me tell you, the funeral of Sheriff Elias Thorne wasn't silent, not for long anyway, and it sure as hell wasn't perfect, at least not in the way the city council wanted it to be, because right there in the front row, sitting next to the empty spot where Elias's widow, Martha, should have been, if she hadn't passed 3 years prior, was Brutus, 100-pound Belgian Malinois with a scar running down his snout and eyes that looked like they'd seen the devil and chased him up a tree. We were all there in the First Baptist Church of Coal Creek, a town that's barely a dot on the map of Wyoming, the kind of place where the wind cuts through your jacket like a knife and the mountains loom over you like judges, and the air inside that chapel was thick, suffocating, smelling of old wood varnish and too many lilies, that cloying, sweet scent that always makes me sick now whenever I walk past a florist. I was sitting 3 rows back, just a junior deputy, feeling like an imposter in my dress blues because Elias had been more than a boss to me. He'd been the guy who pulled me out of a bottle of whiskey when I was 22 and put a badge on my chest, gave me a purpose, so seeing that mahogany casket sitting there, gleaming under the dim yellow lights of the church, it felt wrong, like a mistake in the universe's filing system. But the real problem wasn't my grief, or the town's shock, it was Councilman Sterling, a man who wore suits that cost more than my car and had a smile that never quite reached his eyes, a guy who had been trying to push Elias into early retirement for years because Elias was too old school, too rough, a liability, and now that Elias was gone, Sterling was running the show, treating the funeral like a campaign rally, making sure the press was there, making sure the lighting was right. Checking his watch every 30 seconds like grief was a meeting that was running overtime. Sterling had made it very clear, explicitly clear to the station chief, that Brutus was not welcome inside the church. It's an animal, he'd said, it's unpredictable, it's dirty, and it doesn't understand what's happening, leave the damn dog in the squad car. But the station chief, a man named Henderson who had a spine made of iron, just looked at Sterling and said, that dog is an officer, and he outranks you, Sterling. So he sits in the front, and that was the end of it, or so we thought. So there Brutus sat, rigid, his muscles coiled under that black fur, wearing his K9 vest with the badge draped over it, and he wasn't moving, he wasn't panting, he was just staring at that wooden box with an intensity that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, like he was waiting for a command that was never going to come. The service started, and the preacher, Father O'Malley, a good man but soft-spoken, began the eulogy, talking about duty and sacrifice, the usual script, and the room was dead quiet, until Brutus let out this sound, not a bark, not a growl, but a whine, a high-pitched, vibrating sound that cut right through the preacher's words like a siren. People shifted in their pews, uncomfortable, glancing at each other, and I saw Sterling, sitting across the aisle, stiffen up, his jaw clenching, his eyes darting to Chief Henderson as if to say, I told you so, but Henderson just stared straight ahead, ignoring him, though I could see his hand tightening on his knee. Brutus did it again, louder this time, and then he stood up, his claws clicking on the hardwood floor of the sanctuary, a sharp, rhythmic click-click-click that echoed in the silence, and he didn't look at the crowd, didn't look at the other officers, he walked straight to the casket, sniffing the air, his ears swiveling like radar dishes. Get him out of here, Sterling hissed, loud enough for the first few rows to hear, his face turning a shade of red that clashed with his expensive navy tie. He's ruining the dignity of the service. Henderson grabbed the leash, but nobody moved, because you don't just grab a Malinois that belonged to Elias Thorne. That dog was a weapon, a loyal, thinking weapon, and right now, he didn't look aggressive, he looked confused. No, not confused, he looked frantic, desperate, his tail gave a single, stiff wag, then stopped, and he shoved his nose right against the seam of the coffin lid and let out a sharp, booming bark that made half the congregation jump out of their skins. That is enough. Sterling stood up, abandoning all pretense of respect, stepping into the aisle and pointing a manicured finger at the dog. Officer Reynolds, he pointed at me, because I was the rookie, the easy target, get that animal out of this church immediately or I will have your badge on my desk by morning. this is a disgrace to the sheriff's memory, and for a second, I froze, caught between the hierarchy of command and the gut feeling that something was incredibly wrong, because Brutus wasn't acting like a grieving dog. I've seen grieving dogs, they curl up, they hide, they get lethargic, but Brutus was in drive mode. He was working, his body posture was alert, forward-leaning, the same way he looked when we were tracking a suspect through the woods. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead, and walked toward the front. Easy, Brutus, I whispered, trying to keep my voice calm, hoping the dog wouldn't take my hand off. Come here, buddy, let's go outside. But Brutus didn't even acknowledge my existence, he didn't even flick an ear in my direction, he just kept his nose pressed to the wood, whining, scratching now, his paws digging at the polished mahogany, leaving deep, ugly gouges in the expensive finish that Sterling had probably picked out. He's alerting, I said, my voice sounding strange and thin in the echoing room. He's insane. Sterling yelled from the floor, scrambling to his feet, adjusting his suit jacket with trembling hands. He's desecrating a corpse. Chief, if you don't act, I swear on my life. Shut up, Sterling, Chief Henderson said, and the authority in his voice was like a thunderclap, silencing the room instantly. Henderson walked up beside me, looking at the dog, then at the coffin, then at me. You sure, Reynolds? That's his live-find alert, Chief, I said, my hands shaking. I've seen him do it 100 times in training. He thinks there's something alive in there. A heavy, terrified silence fell over the room again, heavier than before, because the implication was horrifying. Was it possible? Was Elias not dead? But we had seen the body, we had seen the medical examiner's report, heart attack, massive, out in the snow where he'd been patrolling the pass, found frozen 2 days later. There was no mistake, no coma, he was gone. So why was the dog telling us there was a heartbeat inside that box? Brutus started pacing now, circling the coffin, whining, nudging the lid with his snout, looking back at us with those soulful, desperate brown eyes, pleading, open it, he seemed to say, why are you just standing there? Open it, and the desperation in his body language broke my heart. It was raw, unfiltered panic. Open it, Henderson said, his voice low. The funeral director, a pale, skinny guy named Mr. Finch who looked like he was about to faint, stepped forward, wringing his hands. Chief, we can't. It's sealed. It's against protocol. The family, the health code. I don't give a damn about the code, Henderson growled, stepping closer to the casket, placing a hand on the lid. My officer is telling me something is wrong. Open the damn lid, Finch, or I'll pry it open with a crowbar myself. Sterling looked like he was going to have a stroke, his face purple. This is illegal. This is a desecration. I will have you all fired. Every single one of you. But nobody was listening to him anymore. The air in the room was electric, charged with a strange, terrifying energy. Finch, shaking like a leaf, pulled the key from his pocket, approached the casket, and with a trembling hand, inserted it into the locking mechanism. Click. Then the other side. Click. Brutus stopped barking instantly. He froze, tail wagging slowly, low and cautious. Finch lifted the heavy mahogany lid, and the hinges creaked, a sound that seemed to last for an eternity, and everyone in the first 10 rows leaned forward, holding their breath, expecting to see, what? Elias waking up. A ghost? Nothing. The lid rose, revealing Elias, lying there in his dress uniform, still, pale, waxy, exactly as dead as he had been an hour ago, and a collective sigh of confusion and disappointment started to ripple through the room, until Brutus stood up on his hind legs, paws resting on the edge of the coffin, and lunged his head inside, not at Elias's face, but down, towards his chest, towards the folded American flag that had been draped over his hands. No. Get him off. Sterling screamed, thinking the dog was attacking the body, but Brutus wasn't biting. He was nudging. He was pushing his wet nose under the flag, under the stiff fabric of Elias's uniform jacket, whining softly, tenderly, and then, we heard it. A tiny, high-pitched squeak. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It wasn't a floorboard. It was a cry. The room went so quiet you could hear a pin drop in the parking lot. Brutus pulled his head back, and nestled in the crook of Elias's cold, dead arm, hidden beneath the folds of the flag and the jacket, was a tiny ball of fur, no bigger than a grapefruit, shivering, damp, and very, very alive. It was a puppy. But not just any puppy. It was a wolf-dog hybrid, looked like, with silver fur and blue eyes that were barely open, squirming against the cold silk of the coffin lining, trying to find warmth, and Brutus was licking it, cleaning it, making those soft, fatherly grunts that mother dogs make, his entire demeanor transformed from aggression to pure, unadulterated love. I stood there, jaw hanging open, my brain unable to process what I was seeing. How? How did a puppy get into a sealed coffin? The funeral director looked like he was going to vomit. I didn't. I dressed him myself, there was nothing. There's a note, Henderson said. He reached into the coffin, right next to where the puppy was huddled, and pulled out a piece of folded, crinkled notebook paper that had been tucked deep into Elias's inner pocket, the corner of it just barely sticking out now that the puppy had moved. Henderson unfolded the paper, his hands trembling. This was a man who had stared down armed robbers and pulled bodies out of river wrecks without blinking, but his hands were shaking now. He cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and looked at the crowd, then at Sterling, who had finally shut his mouth and was staring at the puppy with wide, bewildered eyes. "It's in Elias's handwriting," Henderson said, his voice cracking. "It says." He had to stop, take a breath, and wipe a tear from his eye, the first time I'd ever seen him cry. "It says, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it back from the ridge. But if Brutus is acting crazy, if he won't let me go, it means he knows she's here. I found her mother in a trap up on Granite Peak, dead. This little one was the only survivor. I tucked her in my jacket to keep her warm, my body heat is the only thing keeping her alive right now. If I die out here, I'm going to button her in. I know Brutus won't leave us. I know he'll tell you. He's a good boy. Take care of them both. Don't let Sterling turn my funeral into a circus. Love, Elias." The silence that followed wasn't the stiff, formal silence of the beginning. It was a stunned, heavy silence, the kind that comes when you realize you've just witnessed something that defies logic. The timeline, it hit me like a physical blow. Elias had died of a heart attack in the storm, yes, but he must have felt it coming. He must have known he was fading. And in his final moments, freezing to death on a mountain, his last thought wasn't fear, it wasn't panic, it was protection. He had zipped that puppy inside his heavy coat, using his own dying body as an incubator, hoping, praying that his partner, his dog, would understand the assignment even after death. And Brutus had. The dog hadn't been barking at a corpse. He hadn't been grieving. He had been guarding. He knew that heartbeat was in there. He knew there was a life that needed saving, and he wasn't going to let them bury it. I watched as Henderson reached in and gently, so gently, scooped up the tiny, shivering creature. Brutus watched him like a hawk, but he didn't growl. He just nudged Henderson's hand, then licked the puppy's face one more time. Henderson held the puppy up, and I swear, right then, the sun broke through the gray clouds outside and a beam of light hit the stained glass, painting the room in colors. It sounds cheesy, like a movie, but it happened. Sterling looked at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes, shrinking into his expensive suit, realizing that all his protocols and dignity and rules were nothing compared to the loyalty of a dog in the heart of the man who trained him. That disgrace he had screamed about was the only thing that made the moment holy. The service eventually continued, but nobody remembers what the preacher said after that. We all just watched Brutus, who laid down at the foot of the casket, finally calm, resting his chin on his paws, his job done, his final mission for Elias complete. That puppy, by the way. I took her. Named her Hope, because it seemed fitting, though Elias probably would have called her Trouble. She's grown now, got her own badge, works search and rescue, and she's got Brutus's eyes and Elias's stubborn streak. But every time I look at her, I wonder about the kind of man who spends his last ounce of strength saving a stray, and the kind of bond that lets a dog hear a heartbeat through a solid oak wall. It makes you think, doesn't it? We spend so much time worrying about the rules, about the right way to do things, about avoiding scenes and keeping up appearances, like Sterling did. But sometimes, the right thing to do is to bark, to scratch, to make a scene, to break the damn furniture if you have to, because there's life hidden in places where everyone else only sees death. I still hear people debating it in town, you know. Some folks say it was reckless, say Elias shouldn't have hidden a wild animal in his uniform, say it was a health hazard, say the dog was dangerous. They say we should have just followed procedure. But I look at Hope, sleeping on the rug by the fire, and I look at Brutus, who's retired now and gray in the muzzle, and I know what the truth is. What do you think? Was it a miracle, or was it madness? Would you have opened that casket? Let me know what you would have done, because honestly, I'm still shaking every time I tell this story.